January 27th, 2026, 2 billion people, $27 trillion, 20 years in the making. The European Union and India just signed what leaders are calling the mother of all deals, and it could reshape the entire global economy. But here's what makes this really interesting. This deal didn't happen in a vacuum. It happened while Donald Trump is waging a global trade war, slapping 50% tariffs on India and threatening Europe with economic isolation. So the question isn't just what this deal does, it's why it happened now and what it means for the future of global trade. Let's break it down. To understand why this deal is so massive, we need to rewind. The India-EU trade negotiations started way back in 2007, nearly 2 decades ago. For years, talks went nowhere. Why? India's protectionist policies, especially in the automobile sector, were a major sticking point. India was charging tariffs as high as 110% on European cars. Imagine buying a BMW for 100,000 euros, then paying another 110,000 euros just in import taxes. That's how protected India's domestic market was. In 2013, the talks completely collapsed. India refused to budge on opening its automobile sector. European negotiators walked away. The deal seemed dead. But then, everything changed. Russia's invasion of Ukraine in 2022 forced both sides to rethink their economic strategies. Suddenly, Europe needed to diversify away from authoritarian regimes. India needed new export markets as global supply chains fractured. Fast forward to 2025. Donald Trump returns to the White House and launches his so-called Liberation Day, imposing massive tariffs on countries around the world. India gets hit with 50% tariffs, partly as punishment for buying Russian oil. Europe faces threats of 25% tariffs over the Greenland dispute. And just like that, the deal that was dead for a decade suddenly became urgent. On January 27, 2026, after negotiations that went until midnight, European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen and Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi announced they had reached an agreement. Okay, so what's actually in this historic agreement? Let's break down the numbers because they're staggering. This deal creates a free trade zone covering 2 billion people. That's more than a quarter of the world's population. Combined, the EU and India represent nearly $27 trillion in economic output and about 25% of global GDP. This is the largest trade agreement either side has ever signed. For European exporters, India is eliminating or reducing tariffs on 96.6% of goods. This saves European companies up to 4 billion euros, that's $4.7 billion, every single year in customs duties alone. Let's get specific. European machinery currently faces tariffs of up to 44% in India. Those are being eliminated. Chemicals, down from 22%. Pharmaceuticals, down from 11%. Aircraft and spacecraft, nearly all tariffs gone. Here's where it gets interesting for consumers. Indian tariffs on European wine, which were as high as 150%, are dropping to between 20 and 30%. Spirits, down to 40%. Beer, down to 50%. Your European wines and spirits just became affordable in India's massive, growing middle-class market. And remember those 110% tariffs on cars? They're gradually falling to just 10% with a quota of 250,000 vehicles per year. For companies like BMW, Mercedes, and Volkswagen, India's market of 1.4 billion people just opened up. But this isn't just good for Europe. India gets massive wins too. The EU is eliminating tariffs on 90% of Indian goods immediately, expanding to 93% within 7 years. India's labor-intensive sectors, the ones hit hardest by Trump's 50% tariffs, get immediate relief. Textiles, apparel, marine products, leather, footwear, gems and jewelry all now enter the EU duty-free. We're talking about $33 billion in exports that previously faced tariffs between 4 and 26%. Indian Commerce Minister Piyush Goyal says this could create 6 to 7 million jobs in the textile sector alone. That's the population of a mid-sized European country. This deal isn't just about physical goods. The EU is opening 144 service subsectors to India, while India is opening 102 to the EU. This includes financial services, maritime services, and telecommunications. Massive wins for India's booming tech and service industries. And there's more. India and the EU also signed a separate security and defense partnership, similar to what the EU has with Japan and South Korea. This isn't just about trade anymore, it's about strategic alignment in an increasingly unstable world. Now here's where the story gets really interesting, because this deal isn't happening in isolation. It's part of a massive geopolitical realignment. Remember, Trump slapped India with 50% tariffs. His Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent was furious when the India-EU deal was announced. He told ABC News, quote, "We have put 25% tariffs on India for buying Russian oil. Guess what happened last week? The Europeans signed a trade deal with India. They're financing the war against themselves." The White House is not happy. But here's the thing, their aggressive tariff strategy is precisely what pushed India and Europe together. When you weaponize trade, you force other countries to find alternatives. For India, this deal is about diversification. They're facing enormous pressure from Washington, but they can't afford to completely cut off Russian oil. They need affordable energy for their growing economy. The EU deal gives them a massive alternative market for their exports. For Europe, it's the same calculation. The US is their largest trading partner, accounting for 17.3% of their total trade. But Trump's threats over Greenland, his unpredictable tariff policies, and his general unreliability as a partner have made Europe realize they need options. There's another player in this game, China. China accounts for 14.6% of EU trade, but tensions are rising over everything from technology to human rights to industrial overcapacity. Both India and the EU see this partnership as a way to build supply chains that don't run through Beijing. As Modi put it, quote, "This partnership will strengthen stability in the international system at a time of turmoil in the global order." Translation, the world's two largest democracies are choosing cooperation over dependence on authoritarian or unreliable partners. So who wins and who loses from this deal? Let's be honest about it. Clear winners: European car manufacturers, wine producers, machinery exporters, pharmaceutical companies. Indian textile workers, jewelry artisans, leather workers, IT professionals. Consumers in both markets who'll see lower prices and more choices. The EU expects its exports to India to double by 2032. India expects to add millions of jobs in labor-intensive sectors. That's real economic growth on both sides. But there are concerns too. Indian automakers saw their stock prices drop 1.6% after the deal was announced. They're worried about European competition. Some Indian industries that have enjoyed decades of protection are going to face serious competitive pressure. India's steel industry is particularly nervous. They're only getting duty-free access for 1.6 million tons, about half of what they currently export. And the EU's carbon border adjustment mechanism taxes carbon-intensive goods like steel, which could hurt Indian exporters. There are also questions about whether small and medium-sized businesses, especially in India, can actually compete with European giants once the barriers come down. Will this create jobs, or will it consolidate power in the hands of multinational corporations? Here's something important. This deal still needs to go through legal vetting in both Brussels and New Delhi. It needs approval from the European Parliament and India's domestic approval processes. Indian officials say it might take effect by the end of 2026, but realistically, we're looking at 2027 before this is fully operational. So what does all this mean for the future of global trade? First, we're witnessing the emergence of a new trading order. The US-dominated system that's existed since World War II is fragmenting. Countries are building multiple partnerships, reducing their dependence on any single market. The India-EU deal comes days after the EU signed a major pact with Mercosur, the South American trade bloc. Last year, the EU signed deals with Indonesia, Mexico, and Switzerland. This is a strategy. Build a network of partnerships that can withstand economic coercion from Washington or Beijing. Second, this is about more than tariffs. For India, the EU represents access to cutting-edge technology, clean energy solutions, and investment capital. For Europe, India represents a massive market, a skilled workforce, and a counterweight to Chinese manufacturing. The deal includes specific provisions for green technology and climate cooperation. Both sides see this as a way to accelerate the transition away from fossil fuels while building new industries. Third, this is fundamentally about values. When von der Leyen calls this a partnership between the world's biggest democracies, that's not just rhetoric. In a world where China and Russia are offering an authoritarian model of development, India and Europe are betting that democratic capitalism can deliver prosperity. The risk? We could be seeing the world divide into competing trade blocs: the US and its allies, China and its partners, and this India-EU axis. That kind of fragmentation historically leads to conflict, not cooperation. So here's the bottom line. The India-EU trade deal is massive, the largest either side has ever signed. It creates a market of 2 billion people, eliminates billions in tariffs, and could create millions of jobs. But it's also a warning shot. To Trump's America, it says, if you weaponize trade, we'll build alternatives. To Xi's China, it says, we can create supply chains that don't depend on you. To Putin's Russia, it says, Europe has options. 20 years ago, this deal failed because of protectionism and mistrust. Today, it succeeded because of Trump's tariffs and global instability. Sometimes, as the saying goes, a crisis is too important to waste. The question now isn't whether this deal will reshape global trade. It already has. The question is whether it will usher in a new era of cooperation between democracies or accelerate the fragmentation of the global economy into rival blocs. Only time will tell. But one thing is certain, the world just got a lot more complicated. What do you think? Is this deal a win for global cooperation or just another step toward economic Cold War? Let me know in the comments below. And if you found this analysis valuable, hit that subscribe button because global trade is only getting more interesting from here.